Good evening, and welcome to September's issue of the Mass. Today is a big deal for me because one of my favorite things to do is, of course, read, and reading the newspaper is no exception. I love reading, and I love reading the newspaper, and I think the newspaper is an important part of our society every day. Now, with that being said, the September segment of Mass is going to be about newspapers, the rise and fall of newspapers, the decline of newspapers, the beginning, the middle, and the end, or what people say is soon to be the end of newspapers. As you know, with society evolving, electronics evolving, it is much easier to pick up this computer, turn it on, and to get news from all around the world, different opinions, different views. You're not one-sided. Everything is at your fingertips. But for me, personally, I enjoy this at my fingertips. I enjoy our local Sun-Sentinel and Miami Herald, USA Today, and the New York Post. I enjoy keeping these papers in my hands and changing the pages and reading the stories. Are they one-sided? Possibly. But it's about the concept of the newspaper for me, the holding it, the abstract newspaper itself. But in this segment, we hope to teach you about the newspaper industry, the beginning, the middle, and the end. We hope that you can get a better understanding and learn from what we have to say about the newspaper. I hope that you will enjoy the segment and that you will find that it gave you a lot of insight into what the newspaper is, was, and does for society. Back in the day, the only way for people to get information about neighboring tribes or other people was through the newspaper. Did it look like this? No. But it was still a form of a newspaper. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoy our presentation on the newspaper, the rise and decline of the newspaper. I hope that you will find it insightful and you will learn from it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome to the September issue of the Mass. Today we're going to talk about the rise and fall of the newspaper. The rise and fall of the newspaper is evident no matter what age you are or where you've been in society. Every sector of the newspaper is deteriorating. There's a website known as the Newspaper Death Watch, which lists newspapers that have folded since 2007. The number is astronomical. It's huge. The last time the mass medium had a crisis like this was during the Great Depression, when people just couldn't afford to buy the newspaper. That's fixable, as we know, but when people just don't buy them, we can change it, but when they have other avenues to get the newspaper, there's nothing we can do about it. News has been around for as long as humans, so therefore news was transferred before paper was even invented. The first recorded type of written news was in 59 BCE. News told the events of tribes and neighboring tribes. Newspapers evolved with time and the colonial newspaper came about. On September 25th, 1690, the first newspaper was published by Benjamin Harris called Public Occurrences, Both Foreign and Domestic. Harris and his paper were banned due to nonconformity. The Boston Newsletter arrived in 1704 and it was printed by John Campbell. There were many more newspapers to follow, like the New England Current, the New York Weekly Journal, the Pennsylvania Gazette. This paper was said to be the best paper of all time, and it was ran by Benjamin Franklin at the age of 24. Also during this period, the New York Journal and John Zenger started the one-sided print during the political times. In 1734, he was arrested for defaming a public official. This led to the First Amendment of 1791 and the freedom of U.S. journalists or citizens to criticize government leaders as long as it is true. Soon to follow this period was the partisan press, or the political paper, usually geared toward the side of a political issue. The commercial press was also a product of this era, and it was geared toward the business. Throughout this time, circulation was low because only the elites could afford it, and really only the elites could read it. One of the most notable women during this era was Elizabeth Timothy. In 1738, she took over the newspaper after her husband had passed. The newspaper was owned by Benjamin Franklin, and she was a partner. The next era was the penny press. Most papers in the 1800s cost 6 cents, but the penny press was only a penny. It had a lot of pictures to appeal to immigrants, and in 1833, Benjamin Day founded the New York Sun, selling it, of course, for 1 penny. It was here that the human interest stories, or the focus on everyday life of humans, came from. In 1830, there were 650 papers and 65 daily papers. In 1840, there was 1440 weekly papers and 140 daily papers. In 1835, James Gordon Bennett wanted to reach the new working class and middle class, so he published the New York Morning Herald. He printed information about the war, he had jokes, a lot of pictures from Charles Dickens. In the 1860s, the Herald was the biggest paper for its time. In 1848, the invention of the wire service was pushed forward for journalism. It was invented by 6 New York newspapers that formed what was known as called the Associated Press. There were groups of journalists that supplied the story they write to all different newspapers around the world. During this time, the newspaper was starting to be seen as a product. And when combining news or media with the product, we know it sells. The final era was known as yellow journalism, or emphasized profitable papers that carried excited human interest stories, crime, and big news headlines. Big crime news made for selling of newspapers. Deco Drive would be considered yellow journalism for our day. They cover overdramatic stories and sometimes forget the roots of yellow press provided for investigative journalism, or the news reports that hunt the story out and plan on exposing someone or something of some type of corruption. There were a couple of key players in this era. They included Joseph Pulitzer and his New York World, or the Post, and William Hearst of his New York Journal. Both men had a rough start, but eventually became the most powerful papers of their time. During the 1800s and 1900s, there were 2 types of journalism. The story-driven model, which is more dramatized important events that were used by the yellow and penny presses. And during the Industrial Revolution, everything became marketable, including the newspaper. So to keep sponsors in there, they became a clear line of objectivity or impartialness with the newspaper. Objective journalism was born in the 20th century. This is a way of distinguishing between factual and opinionated works with a neutral attitude and multi-views of the subject. The process by way this works is known as the inverted pyramid style. A reporter gets a story, strips it of all adverbs and adjectives, and then takes all the newsworthy information and produces the story. They answer the who, what, when, and where, and sometimes they worry about the why and the how. They start at the top of the story and work it down. By the 1920s, it was understood that certain subjects should be impartial and others should be more in-depth or opinionated. The result was interpretive journalism. This is an explanation of the key issues or events and placing them in broader historical and social context. Broadcasters jumped on the bandwagon of interpretive journalism. They started broadcasting the news right off the paper. During the 60s and 70s, everyone was rebelling. Literary journalism, also new journalism, came about. It was written with the facts but some personal issues involved. Over the 60s, people started to attack journalism's objectivity. It was said that they were so detached from their writing that they didn't really have any feeling about what they were talking about. It promoted precision journalism, in which they do a more scientific view, and advocacy journalism, which they promote a certain group. 2 important things happened in the 80s that affected the newspaper, the TV and the internet. In 1980, the Columbus Dispatch became the first online newspaper, and in 82, the USA Today arrived. They set a new standard for vibrant, bright newspaper, and result changing the look of newspaper. Today, the visual effect of paper is important as its content. With the rise of internet news, newspapers are trying anything to keep their readers. As of 1990s, most newspapers have played follow the leader and made an online page for their newspaper. It is easier for people to wake up, log in, and look at their newspaper than to go outside and actually hold the paper and read it. The TV stations have had to adapt also. That's why our local channels offer 4 hours of news in the morning and 1 hour at lunch and a few hours at dinner. So the rise of internet has caused a decline of not only the newspaper but the TV industry also. For hundreds of years, the newspaper has educated, entertained, and spoke to the people. It has provided the people with information or insight that they needed. But like every aspect of human society, evolution must continue and something has to be left behind.